I always try to gather, besides the health history, is what is their goal? What is their dream? And once we find out what their dream is, then we start to correct imbalances, and then we start getting towards a regular exercise routine. Because let's say somebody just wants to be able to, I don't know, if we're talking 40 years old and up, maybe they want to be able to go throughout their day without being tired. Maybe they want to be able to function better strength-wise so they can do more housework. Or maybe they want to run a 5K. Well, all of those are individualized based on what they're bringing. So when we look at exercise, I remember talking about high-intensity exercise, anaerobic training. I couldn't agree more. It's probably the most effective way to burn fat for fuel. However, if you go into the program unknowingly, or if you're working with somebody and they're not checking on your, number one, how are your sugars this week? How is your sleep this week? And getting a kind of a baseline on your nervous system, because the two common things you're going to use in your exercise program is going to be your nervous system and hormonal system.
Welcome to the Type 1 and Midlife podcast. My name is Melissa Slem, a certified nutritional health coach and the founder and CEO of Abundant Health with Melissa, where I help women with type 1 diabetes to feel more empowered and live their best life despite their diagnosis. Each week, I will bring conversations and strategies from guest experts and my experience living with type 1 for over 40 years now. So if you're a woman ready to redefine how diabetes can look and feel for you, then the Type 1 and Midlife podcast is the show for you. Well, hello and welcome. Today's episode, we welcome Brian Schwager. He is the founder of Wellness Movement Services, where he offers a holistic and integrative evidence-based approach to fitness training. Brian has been in the health and fitness fields, many aspects of the fitness fields for nearly 40 years now, and he has a very diverse educational background, and he's going to help share a lot of what he's learned and what he does as a coach with his own clients and within that setting. And today we're going to dive into how important movement is, and it is so important that we are terming this movement is medicine. So it's definitely a very, very important and useful tool for those of us with type 1 diabetes to better manage and integrate our insulin and the effectiveness of our insulin and our blood sugar control, and just really how we're doing and feeling every day, managing our disease, and to feel empowered by that. So he's going to share what is called working in versus working out. So I can't wait to share his thoughts about this type of exercise and when they are important, and when we just have to stop and listen to our body and to pay attention to what our body and everything around us is really kind of telling us naturally what type of exercise is really going to be the beneficial way to go. And he's going to ask us some questions so you can determine your own readiness for exercise. And you get a chance to look a little deeper, ask yourself some questions so that you can take the next step, because we're all about taking action here on this show. And Brian's going to help us do that. He's going to drive the conversation and give us some things to just feel more empowered with movement, managing type 1 diabetes. So come on in and listen, and we hope that you enjoy this show, and we will share his contact information so that you can get in touch with Brian and schedule your own fitness assessment or just to talk with him about your next steps. So listen in, and we hope you enjoy. Just a reminder that nothing you hear on this Type 1 and Midlife podcast should be a substitute for professional medical advice. Please always consult your medical professional before changing your diet, insulin dosages, or healthcare plan. Well, hello and welcome. I'm excited to have a chance to talk with Brian. Brian is actually somewhat of a neighbor. We live in close proximity within the same I guess we're about an hour apart here, Brian. So welcome to the show. We're so happy you're here to share your expertise on this topic.
Oh, thank you for inviting me on.
Yeah, it's been great. You and I have had a chance to chat before we obviously hit record today. So I've gotten to know you, and you have so many things to share about this topic. We're going to narrow it down a little bit because you're just the broad spectrum of all of the things that you've done in your career. And maybe you can give our listeners a little bit of a tidbit about that. And then, ladies, we're going to be talking about movement is medicine, near and dear to my heart. So you're going to hear more about that too. So share a little bit about yourself in relation to this topic.
Yeah, so 42 years, my goodness, 42 years in the health and fitness industry, and 25 of those years spent working clinically. But pertaining to this topic in general, I take a very deep approach to wellness, a person's lifestyle, when designing exercise programs. And it fit perfect because diabetes is a growing and continues to grow challenge for both male and female. And I wanted to address females in particular because my interest towards training females started going in depth about 2016, and I just finished a course that really went deep on that topic. So I'll be happy to share some exciting things about how we can use movement as medicine.
Yes, and it's something that a lot of the listeners that have already heard some shows here on this podcast. And we're new, we're still new, and we're really unpacking all these different layers of managing blood sugar, and movement is a big part of that. And I know it's not a secret. It's not something that's probably the first time that a lot of you have heard. But today we really want to emphasize, just how important it is, why it's important, and how blood glucose can be better managed when we use exercise. And Brian's going to share some different types of exercise that we can be trying. Again, it's all about what you enjoy doing, and we're more inclined to keep it going and be more sustainable with what we do when we enjoy doing it. Have you found that too, Brian, with the people that you work with?
Definitely. One of the questions I ask them is, do you like to exercise? And a lot of people surprisingly say, no, I'm here, but I don't like to exercise. So that's a unique quality I had to learn to adapt to.
I can relate. Yes. And I can relate because, and this is no judgment on anybody, because I think you and I, Brian, have a lot in common. Just like I have a lot of friends, fellow diabetics. My husband is a good example. We can't imagine a life without movement. It's just so part of who we are. And I think that it starts with it being obviously a regular practice. And I think, the more we do something, the more that we can kind of see ourselves enjoying it, seeing the results. And we always want more of what we can get when we see good results. It's kind of a snowball effect. When something feels good and there's good results, then that's, again, the motivator to keep going. So exercise is a good indicator of that. And, I wanted to start too, the fact that exercise can be scary. And I've written articles about this as well. And I understand it. Again, a long-time exerciser like myself, and I have experienced the lows that have been caused by, again, different types of exercise. And that's something that we'll talk more about here with you, Brian. And the effects sometimes when we're working out, again, when it's more of an anaerobic state where our liver is actually dumping glycogen, which is a cortisol dump. Again, these are just general terms. I know that there's more scientific ways to describe this, but these are terms women with diabetes can all relate to because they understand what I'm talking about. And so I understand. So that is the number one thing I hear from my clients, the ones that do not have it in their regular routine, is they're afraid. they're afraid because they haven't figured out a way to do it safely, confidently, even though they realize that there are definitely some benefits to it. So that's definitely something that I work through. So is this something that, whether or not you work with specifically with people with diabetes, even type 2 diabetes, because I know that's something that you do, some clients that you do spend time with. So what do you think about that sort of reaction, and how would you kind of address it?
Well, the first thing is I look at movement as a medicine. So when someone comes to me, whether they have a blood sugar handling issue, such as diabetes, or they have another issue, I have to groom the exercise based on their ability to respond to it. So, like with exercise, we can look at running, we can look at aerobics or anaerobic or weightlifting. Sure, all of those are good, and I have other ones that are even safer. However, it has to be geared towards the individual, because maybe suggesting exercise to you, Melissa, might be different to one of your listeners. Maybe that one of your listeners not only have diabetes, but maybe they have issues with joint swelling. Maybe they have issues with that previous injury. Maybe they had a child and they had a C-section, and they have problems with low back stiffness after they get done working out. And then, of course, again, the whole, we don't want to run them too high in their sugars, and we don't want to run them too low. But the pre-existing things is what I'm looking at. So if they come in and say, I have diabetes, I already have an idea that we have blood sugar handling issues. We may have some adrenal issues going on underneath the radar. And that's where I start customizing movement as medicine per the individual and per the age. We're looking at an audience of 40 plus.
Yeah.
I have a 75-year-old with knee problems and back problems and blood sugar handling issues, and he wants to move. So you start seeing how we have to, tailor the exercise, because like a medicine, if it's wrongly prescribed, you will have a side effect.
That is so cool. And, I love your approach, because it really is a full, whole body approach. It has to be. And I like how you definitely, and that's the way I coach as well. And we're so unique. So it's not a one size fits all exercise program. That kind of reminds me too, there's been all these different kind of popular, trendy type of workouts that are out there, whether it's and there's definitely some that are more structured and more designed for certain people in the population. But I keep thinking of the kind of like the boot camp, the hardcore, where people are out there in a field throwing tires around. And again, this is no judgment. This is just my thought. I just think it's just waiting for an injury to happen. And it doesn't take into account these particular individuals and where they are, not only their age and their fitness level, but like you say, just the foundation, where they're coming from, a musculatory skeletal area. So, and I don't even know if this is something that you can talk to as well, because I know in your training and the programs that you design, and you can probably share a little bit more about that, a little bit more detail. I know I talked about it in the intro, but we'd love to hear maybe if you have a case study or somebody individual, a unique situation that maybe you could share, just so our listeners get an idea of exactly what you do and how you apply your expertise to the people you help.
So first thing I always try to gather, besides the health history, is what is their goal? What is their dream? And once we find out what their dream is, then we start to correct imbalances, and then we start getting towards a regular exercise routine. Because let's say somebody just wants to be able to, I don't know, for talking 40 years old and up, maybe they want to be able to go throughout their day without being tired. Maybe they want to be able to function better strength-wise so they can do more housework. Or maybe they want to run a 5K. Well, all of those are individualized based on what they're bringing. So when we look at exercise, I remember, talking about high intensity exercise, anaerobic training. I couldn't agree more. It's probably the most effective way to burn fat for fuel. However, if you go into the program unknowingly, or if you're working with somebody and they're not checking on your number one, how are your sugars this week? How is your sleep this week? And getting a kind of a baseline on your nervous system, because the two common things you're going to use in your exercise program is going to be your nervous system and hormonal system. And if both of those are taxed out, but yet you want to get out there and you want to lose weight and you're really ambitious, you might be draining rather than training. And if you have any pre-existing musculoskeletal challenges, and what I mean by that for your listeners, if you had a knee injury 10 years ago and you had a C-section and you have back challenges or tight muscles, those have to be corrected first. And that's what we didn't do in the 70s and 80s. So a lot of what I do, no matter who walks in my door, I'm restoring them first.
Right.
Getting them restoration. And that means lifestyle and movement restrictions and imbalances. Then get them to the real fun stuff. And then from there, they kind of do it on their own, but not a blanket approach where, Brian, can I go to bar class tonight? I want to go to hot yoga tonight. I want to go to boot camp or high intensity group class. Well, they may not quite be ready for that yet. And they're setting themselves up for further challenges, especially when it comes to looking at diabetes, because when these hormones get elevated, the glucagon, the cortisol, the adrenaline, and the noradrenaline, it has an effect on how our muscles will react. And it may feel good when you're done, but 2 days later, you might be a train wreck.
Right.
But if you're prepared, you can go out and have that kind of fun and not have the repercussions. So a case study, when I work with clients, especially females, like I had a female come to me after she had her child. It was, I forget, it was like 2 years after she had her child. She's got some reasonable blood sugar issues. She's not diabetic, but we're trying to keep her out of that category. But what I want to express for your listeners is the first thing I had to do after I assessed her was restructure her, because she had too much of an arch in her back. Her knees were locked out. Her head was forward. Now she's snowboarding, she's wakeboarding, she's running. But for that 6 months, I restored her and we looked at lifestyle. Her sleep wasn't adequate, so she wasn't recovering, etc. So the main takeaway is, how are you sleeping? What are your lifestyle issues? Let's introduce exercise, but let's use intelligence and let's not make it worse. And I got to say, with my 42 years in the industry and 25 clinically, I've seen people come in like train wrecks because things were not addressed, especially biochemical. And females, that's a great topic, because when I jumped onto the female bandwagon full time in 2014, boy, were my eyes open further. I trained women all my life, but when I started learning the science around menstruation cycles and around their hormones, and their whole hormonal system is different than males. Men need to learn how to train women.
So different. Oh, yeah. So true. Yes. Yeah. And another thing that you pointed out too is just that, we, and obviously if we decide to work with somebody with our fitness, is really looking at our history and looking at what's hurting, paying attention to what's not feeling right. And these are things that you do, I know, in your clinic, is you do body assessments. Am I saying that term right? As far as you're looking the posture and assessing where they are. Is it a questionnaire? Is that how you do it? It's both physical and just talking through it with them?
Yes, it's both subjective. I have a short questionnaire for somebody who doesn't want to go down the rabbit hole. I have a long one. I have a short assessment for those who don't have a lot of complications with their physical health. That's a movement assessment. And I have an extensive one. But either one, what that client is going to walk away with is a rating. They've been rated now. And you know that when your blood sugar doesn't rate in the category it needs to, we got to find help. The same thing with movement restrictions and lifestyle. I see what I call those are cautionary indicators. In the medical field, we used to call them red flags. Somebody come into my office, I got 4 red flags, and I have to take them down a different rabbit hole before we get to regular exercise. Cautionary indicators is we put up the caution sign. Let's restore this, because it's like I would tell my clients, I want to get you to your dream. I want to be able to work out and climb. And well, what about life? I want you to, when you're 60 and 70, I still want you to be functional. Because even like me, as a former athlete, all my dreams are done when it comes to athletic. Now I just want to be able to move, work out, and enjoy the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
And again, it comes down to assessing. If we're not assessing, then we're guessing. And that's the vicious cycle I started to see in the early 2000s, where people, when I was working clinical, people were coming back with injuries. I saw them 6 months ago or 3 months ago or 3 weeks ago, because things weren't being taken care of. And I think our listeners, what they want to do is they want to get out and move, but they don't want to end up at the chiropractor more than they need to. Nothing wrong with massage, but if you have to have it excessively, and we definitely want to reduce our chances to go to the orthopedic surgeon and the physical therapist. So it's about intelligence. It's about using exercise and prescribing it based on what the person is capable of doing. And that's what we call exercise design with intelligence in mind.
Yeah. And, when you bounce that off the competitive nature of some people, and, even for women, we hit a certain age, and, and you probably can agree with this, usually the number one, and this might be outside of the diabetes conversation, but the number one motivator for women to work out is to lose or maintain weight. And not knowing really what type of exercise is going to fit, to help them get there. And I'm guilty of this myself. I have always been, and I think this is just my nature, I like to move and do, not intense, but I do like cardio, but I also like resistance training. So I think I do a good job at balancing it. But for instance, I'll use an example. We do paddleboarding here in our little city, and I have access to the boards. And my husband will tease me. He's like, "You got to get out there and do some paddleboarding." Okay, what my thinking is? It's like, well, if I've got an hour to separate, to take, if I have an hour to give to exercise, it's not going to be paddleboarding because it's not exerting enough for me, which is the wrong way to think. And I have to check myself on this, because, you really have to figure out, again, like what you said, what our goals are, what we want the end result to be. And there's a lot more, because there's a lot of different types of movement that can serve those things. But it's that mindset that I think we have to kind of understand, what we're thinking we're going to get from it, and realizing it's much more than just a hardcore sweat. You know what I'm saying? It's, and because movement can be in different forms.
Yes. And, you hit it on the head. It's be enjoyable. So maybe paddleboarding wasn't the thing for you, and you found a different form of exercise that brings enjoyment, gets your heart rate up.
Yeah.
And that's, like you said at the beginning, it has to be enjoyable. The more complicated it is, paddleboarding may seem easy, but that uses a reflex that nobody ever trains. That's called your tilting reflex, because the water moves underneath you. When you run across the ground, you're working your righting reflex. So going back to the 38-year-old mother, her goal is to get on a snowboard. And I said, well, I need to increase your tilting reflex response so that when you hit a mogul or whatever you're going to hit, half pipe or whatever, you can adjust. Where like maybe her mom, who's 75, she wants to be able to walk on the beach.
Right.
Well, the beach can be unforgiving to someone with bad knees. So I got her to a point of stability and sleep, because we've got to get back to, is their nervous system prepared for it? And now she can walk, not on the soft sand yet, because we're working our way to that, but on the hard sand.
Understood.
That brings joy to her, right?
Yeah.
She can walk to the store, from her car to the store and back, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
See, it goes back to, is it, number one, we have to have function to get through life. Once we've accomplished that and we have our basic fundamental movement patterns, now let's start thinking about what we want to do. You want to run? Do you want to go to class? Do you want to do boot camp? Do you want to do X, Y, or Z?
Yeah.
And the most important question to ask yourself and check yourself with is, how is my sleep?
It starts with that, doesn't it?
It
Yes,
does.
it sure does.
If you're not recovering, because exercise, we want a result. We want to burn fat for fuel. We want to increase lean muscle tissue. And both of those require what they call a catabolic response. You have to tear down before you build up. Years of training athletes. I used to tell my athletes, you don't get stronger in the gym. You get stronger on the days off, but they never take days off. And and believe me, I work with athletes that would work out 2 times a day and so on. But for the average individual, if their sleep isn't where it should be, then we can create an exercise program that won't overstimulate the nervous system. Then once their sleep gets back to regulated, well, let's kick up the level of difficulty and let's do something a little bit more aggressive. And
that's good advice.
For women, another thing that I learned, which was a fault, is that every woman cycles a little different. And like this 38-year-old, I design 3 different routines for her a month, and they're all designed around her cycle. Certain times of the cycle, she doesn't have as much energy, so we do work in, and I'll get to that in a minute.
Yes, I'm excited to talk about that.
The cycle, she gets to work out. In fact, she emailed me today and she said, I'm ready to get to my workout. I want my Wild Woman program, and that's high intense, paired sets, low rest, bada bing, bada boom. Now, I mentioned the word work in versus work out. So today, for me, today was a work in day. Sleep wasn't the best. So I got up and did I created my own work in exercises, and then I mix in some Tai Chi and some yoga. Work out means to exert. Work in means to restore. So if you're, and a lot of that psychological, because when I was younger, even though I didn't sleep well, I'd go work out anyway, not knowing that I was draining the tank. And when you drain the tank long enough, you'll end up with chronic fatigue. You can end up with a shoulder problem, a knee problem, etc. So just that term working in versus working out, and adapting and allowing. Like when that client of mine in Arizona called me 3 weeks ago and told me she was having this was a bad cycle for her, I rewrote her exercise system and then based it on what she was dealing with. I could base the exercise around your gut, your neck, your head. If you're feeling discombobulated, can't put things together, I can resynchronize your left and right brain in an exercise. You won't even know what's happening, but you're following the routine, and built into that routine, I'm working your pancreas, I'm working your stomach, your large intestine, and maybe even the left and right side of the brain.
That's so good. And again, these are things we don't know. These are things that we're not aware of. Our body's telling us these things. It's definitely giving us the signs and the symptoms. And, we tend to just kind of slough it off. And, today's another day. I'll get up and do what I've always done. And this is a great conversation, just to kind of educate the ladies. And so tell us more about the working in and versus the working out, and give some examples. And, you were mentioning the low stress, just to get back to the paddleboarding, because I'm not bashing paddleboarding. And when my husband hears this show, because he races paddleboards, I've done racing on paddleboards. So I'm very good at the sport. I just don't spend a lot of time on it because, again, it's a different stage of life. So it's hard for me. It's an enjoyment. The phase I'm in now, I don't race anymore. Because you can do all levels. You can just get out there, and it's really just enjoying the surroundings, facing the conditions, because the conditions and the tide and the wind all affect what your experience is going to be on the paddleboard that day. Not to mention the paddleboard, because there are different types of boards. There's lots of different factors to paddleboarding. But but I know that I had to do a self-check on myself just recently, because I have access to a low stress exercise that is going to still work my body and get me more in tune with myself and time and my surroundings. And that would really favor my whole fitness, my mind, body, and spirit. So this is just a reminder that we need to just slow down, slow down and, just experience what we can experience and be joyful in that.
We call it readiness. So when we look at working in, so the client comes in and I ask them, how was your sleep the last couple of days? How's your stress at home? And right off the bat, I'm checking off some cautionary indicators. So I decide that day, I said, we're going to work in today. And we're going to do exercises. I'll pull a few from the yoga family. And then I have a bunch of other ones, Feldenkrais, Alexander. These are what they call mind-body exercises. And if your listeners don't know what those are, all they have to do is Google Feldenkrais, Musashi Feldenkrais, or the Alexander technique. And they will see some pretty weird exercises that are low to the ground. One thing I learned when I was working clinical with a neurologist, and we would design exercise programs for people that had neurological overload, like have a bad day, right? Neurological overload,
Exactly.
He would say, Brian, I'm sending so-and-so over to you low and slow today. And what he meant, and what we both agreed with, is I took him down to the ground. No standing up exercises, because when you're neurologically, or what I should say, when your nervous system is tapped out, but you still want to do something, the minute you get vertical, there's more energy expenditure, because you have your proprioception, your balance, your coordination. And the brain can't computate all that because it's overstimulated. So I take them to the ground, and I can still work on their hip mobility. I can still work on their breathing and their blood sugar levels and their heart rate, and not use as much cortisol. When they get done, they should feel more energized. If your listeners know the difference between yin and yang,
right? Good example.
Yin means to restore and nourish, and yang means to exert and break down. And there's a time for both. If you're feeling good today, let's work out. You're not feeling good today, let's work in. We have to honor the balance between yin and yang, and that's a whole new topic for the exercise industry, especially for the boot camps and the high intensities.
Yes.
Because there's days where you shouldn't be doing that. I usually end up seeing those kind of people as patients later on, but working in. And the other thing about working in is it should never labor your breathing. It should never be out of breath. So when I do a work in exercise, I use breath. So let's say if you brought your arms out in front of you and then you folded them in like you're giving yourself a hug, that's when you would exhale. Now, if you're extending them up like you're reaching over your head, right? That would inhale.
Inhale, right.
And breath is nurtured to joint mechanisms, and it's nurtured to the neurological system. All my clients, all they do is they follow the instructions. Okay, during this portion of the movement, I want you to exhale. And then during this portion of movement, I want you to inhale. If any of your listeners have ever done any standing Tai Chi, right? Or Qigong, it's all with breath.
Familiar.
And what we're doing is we're re-regulating the nervous system. And that's what working in is for. It's for re-regulating, restoring, and reprogramming. Because if your computer has too many windows open, it might start to struggle. So you shut some of the windows down if you happen to have a bad hard drive. Well, our brains are not much different. The brain is the hard drive, and your movement with your limbs, that's your software. And if you're overstimulated, you have to take some of the windows and shut them down so that your system works operatively. But lo and behold, once you recover, now we can get back to jumping and jacking and, working out and losing our breath, like high intensity. If you work out for 15 seconds as hard as you can, and you get a minute and a half off, that's high intensity work.
Right.
Exactly. I may only have you do 5 exercises. You'll be burning calories for 72 hours, but you're only 15 minutes.
Oh, it's such a great formula. It really is. And you bring up a good point too, because you were mentioning Tai Chi and Qigong. yoga is obviously a really good example of this too. I had a chance to talk with Rachel Zinman back in episode 3. She's type 1, living with type 1, and how impactful yoga and just obviously the breathing, the isometric movements, and there's different types of yoga. That's one of the things that we did talk about, just to be able to find the best type for you. And if you haven't had a chance, I definitely recommend everybody to go back and listen in. She gave us some really good insights on that. And this brings back a topic too, and we're going to keep going with the low and the working in and the working out examples. Yoga is, and in that episode. And I would love to hear your thoughts about this too, Brian. We talked a lot, obviously, about yoga and its impact on insulin sensitivity, not only during the activity, but the prolonged benefits definitely within the 24 hours. Sometimes it would carry over into 48 hours. I think there's a lot of other lifestyle factors that kind of, that are included in that equation. But for myself, I do yoga here. Again, we have a yoga business. That's another one of my side jobs, which I'm really, really blessed about that. So I have some yoga teachers that work for me. So we have a 7:30 a.m. daily morning class. It overlooks the ocean. And I don't go every day. I try to go a couple times a week. That's always my goal. But what an impact that working in does. Not only it's just the best way to start the day, overlooking the ocean. And of course, this time of year, it's a little warm. So, we definitely, we get the sunshine, we get the vitamin D, and we have a chance to just stop and to feel those benefits, not only physically, but how it does help with insulin sensitivity. It's proven. And I really encourage, all of us to seek out these type of practices. It's all about balance, isn't it? Just like you say, it's definitely understanding where you are and what your body needs at a certain time. But yoga needs to be something too that we bring in. And when we get older, when our hormones are dropping, it's proven that we need less intense exercise.
Maybe
Yeah.
Post-menopause, now they're showing, depending on the individual, you can do intensity training for the individual that's ready, but it would be tailored to a 70-year-old. However, going back to yoga, it brings you back to your center.
Sure
it
does.
brings you back to you. So when you're out there with your lady friends or anybody that's taking the class, they're all identifying with themselves. This is their time. This is their time to commune with. What does yoga mean? It means to commune with God. So these asanas that you hold, in the yogis used to hold, each asana, they would say a Sanskrit prayer. Now try to hold a position and then say a prayer. That takes a lot of self-discipline. Sure. And all we're doing when we look in the Western world, we're embracing the point of using movement gracefully, because there's, like you said, there's different types of yoga. Like today might be a hatha yoga day, and it might be more of a harder style of asana positioning.
Right.
Either one, I'm bringing that client back to their breath, focusing on the present moment. And then when they leave the class and they go about their day, now they plug into the universe, right? Oh, I got to get the shopping done. I got lunch.
That's right.
Then I teach my client to practice the art of what they just did in the work-in to control their mind throughout the day. And that helps to control blood sugar. Because the blood sugar mechanism, where is it located? Well, it's not just the pancreas. What operates the pancreas? It's in the amygdala part of the brain where we handle our emotions. So when we get excited, what does the pancreas do? It gets excited. What does the adrenal and what does the kidneys and the bladders do? They get excited. And nothing wrong with that, because for a healthy person, they can handle it. Yeah. But if somebody has, issues with their gallbladder or their pancreas or whatever organ, I teach them to go throughout their day. I just wrote an email to a gentleman in Arizona. because he was having some issues with his stress. He's got he's a brand new father. He's a full-time doctor. I mean, full-time. He's doing working and he wants to work out. And I said, this week, I want you to practice the art of what we call thought redirection. So when you start getting excited, bring it back to the present moment, right here, right now. Focus on what's in front of you, whether it's the paperwork, your patient, your child, or whatever, and start practicing that. And after a while, it becomes second nature. And now you're doing yoga all day.
I love that.
Now
Beautiful.
you're doing yoga all day. And then for everybody else who can do workout and they can get their heart rate up and really kick it into gear, I always end the session with breathing. So I bring them back down to the center, because now they got to go out and they got to be mom, dad, or the owner of a business or employee. I got to bring them back down when we're done. They just had a great workout. But again, what we're talking about here is hormones and nervous system. Hormones and nervous system. And exercise is a gateway to either jacking them up or restoring them. And I think now in our culture, people are gravitating towards more yoga. People are liking the idea of Tai Chi. Yeah, they still want to go out there and work out, trust me. But isn't that something, how they're getting more receptive to the Eastern ways of movement? Yeah. And those movement styles have been around for over 2,500 years.
Never too late. Never too late to
never too late to learn.
Never too late. You so one of the questions that I know that you and I talked about before is, and something that we could I'm all about creating a space for our listeners. You know, they've heard a lot of really good talk today and information, but to pose a question. So what is their readiness for exercise? And which, and this is in your words, which refers to the state of the nervous system and its preparedness for physical activity. So you have a couple questions. So this might be a good start for everybody. You know, they've kind of heard all of these ideas and things that we've shared, but for them to maybe think intuitively and just kind of listen to their, pay attention to really what they're doing, what they're not doing, and to look closer at what could be, I'm not going to say corrected, but repaired, right? We can use the word repaired or worked on or focused on. So the first question you mentioned was, are you currently taking time to exercise? Yeah, you got to start with where they are, what they're doing, and just looking at that foundation, right?
Right. I want to get a general scope of what they're doing, and then they'll give me the answer. Oh, I work out 3 days a week. I go to yoga. I'm starting to gather what their movement is like throughout the week. So that gives me, now I can start there, right, with asking them what type of exercise they do. They may say nothing. I don't exercise at all. That tells me a lot too. And then we go down the list. I start with movement first because most of our listeners are doing something. They're walking, they're going to class, they're doing something. And if they're not, they're going to do something after the show. They're going to be motivated.
We're planting that seed. I love it. So the next step and we talked about this already, is are they having any sleep-related issues? So again, it's looking back, because sleep impacts insulin sensitivity. It impacts, what we're going to eat or not eat, our energy, our mood, our hormone levels, and obviously the type and reaction that our body's going to have with movement. So what do you?
I ask them, what time do you go to bed at night? I want to get a ballpark figure, because if they're going to bed at 11 or 12, now your listeners are going to learn something here. So take out a pencil and a piece of paper and write this down.
This is good stuff, ladies. I agree.
This is the nuggets. 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. is when your body's physically repairing. Okay. So again, we have to break down so that we can build up. And when does our body repair? Mostly at night. So if I have a client going to bed at 11, 11:30 or 12, they're missing that window of recovery, which means that they could end up in a debt Now,
Right. Yeah.
between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. is when your brain repairs.
Mm.
So my clients that get up at 3 to go to the bathroom, or maybe they wake up and they can't get back to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Either one of these, whether they have a hard time falling asleep or they have a hard time staying asleep, that self-awareness, I'm teaching them, okay, now based on your score and your sleep rating, we're going to start with work in, and we got to restore your sleep. Before we get to the workout portion, I could skip let's say I skip the question altogether and I just get them moving, and they end up with adrenal fatigue, and they end up with highs and lows in their sugars, and they're frustrated. Well, that's partly my fault because I didn't ask the question, what is your sleep like? And there's other questions, but we're talking about sleep recovery. What I'm teaching my clients to do is become self-aware. Well, but Brian, it's hard for me to get to bed by 11. All right, I get it. Let's start with going to bed at 10:45. And when you master that, let's go to bed at 10:30. And why, if you have a hard time getting to sleep, that means that from 3 p.m. on, there's either something you're eating or something you're doing that's giving you your second wind when you shouldn't have it. Because according to the circadian cycle, depending on where you live in the planet, you should start coming down around 8:30, 9 o'clock. And I call it like taking a plane in for landing. Now, if I don't put down the landing gear, it's going to be a rough landing, isn't it? So the landing gear
That's
is
right.
sleep hygiene.
Yes.
Sleep
It's
hygiene.
all about
Winding down, knowing when to turn off the computer, the laptops, and the phone, and moving towards something that, and there again, I may, like that gentleman, the doctor, he's got 2 work-in exercises he does right before he goes to bed. Because when he gets home, he's got to be father.
Yes.
And that might push him into 7 o'clock, and he's still jacked up with work. He has to be putting work to the side. He stops at 7. He starts his notes for work. And by 8 o'clock, he's all wound up. And I'm not going to tell him not to do his notes for work. So what I said, we'll worry about that later. But at 9 o'clock, turn everything off, or 9:30, and do these breathing exercises and these other exercises and begin to calm down so you can go to sleep. Now, if they're not able to stay asleep, here's something for your listeners. You know that serotonin helps you to stay asleep. It has other benefits too. Well, you know that 95% of your serotonin is made in your stomach. So if my clients have sleep issues and they're having to take, Ambient or some sort of sleep drug, or maybe they're even taking melatonin, their issue might be in their gut. And your body's not producing the serotonin, because at about 3 o'clock, your body will start producing hormones for repair, human growth hormones, and it'll start releasing hormones for sleep so that you can start yawning and start getting ready for sleep. The body holds the score. What we did is we tried to shove our lifestyle into the circadian rhythm, tried to put a square peg in a round hole. And what do we get? We have 70 to 80 million Americans have some sort of sleep issues. When I was working in Asheville, 9 out of 10 people I interviewed had some sort of sleep issues.
It's epidemic.
Self-awareness.
It really is. There's so many layers to it, as you had just mentioned too. It's lifestyle, it's those demands, it's not shutting it off or knowing how to shut it off. But it all goes back with how our bodies were designed. There's, like you said, there's circadian rhythm. There's a reason that those hormones and those levels are supposed to drop at a certain time. Our bodies know what to do. We tend to fight it. So awareness is the first key for sure. Now, the next thing you mentioned on your questions, again, these are some questions that everybody can start to ask themselves so that we can use movement as medicine in our future, starting today. Do you have an injury, or are you currently injured? Or I should say, have you had an injury, or are you currently injured? So is there anything going on now with your body?
Yeah, we want to know, Melissa and I need to know up front, because even if you had one, you're already at risk for another one, because that area, who knows if that therapist and that other exercise program may not have satisfied
Really
the
healed
recovery.
it. Yeah.
And if you currently have a little something, I'm talking little, I know people can say, well, I got a meniscus problem in my knee and I got a labrum problem in my hip. That's for a different topic. But what we're looking at is risk, cautionary risk factors. So if somebody said they had an injury, I just find out where it was. I was in a car accident or whatever, and I'll see the imbalances later when I look at their posture. If they have one now, then I make note of it. Where is the injury? Or they fill it out on the form. My knee hurts or whatever. But we get to that point because now we're trying to see, sleep issues can increase their risk for injury. Previous injuries can increase their risk for injury. Of course, current injury, that just kind of falls into the injured pile.
Sure.
But when we've had an injury before, 9 out of 10 times that person will come in and see me. Like all my clients have had an injury before, and I'll look at their flexibility. And the other day I found a left hamstring was way tighter than the right, but they were doing the same amount of stretching on both sides. So that's called an imbalance. And they were having what? They were having knee issues on the side where it was tight. So, again, these are questions that we need to ask ourselves, because what you're about to do, your clients are about to embark on a movement journey. And at the beginning, they may have to use more work in and restoration. And then phase 2 and 3, now they're back to working out. And then you pepper in the work in when you need it. You had a bad day, had a bad night's sleep. Well, tomorrow I'm going to do work in. But by the day after, I'm back to 100%. But have they had an injury, or are they currently, dealing with one?
Yeah. That's also good. It's just being aware. And I like the fact that, whether or not somebody's working with a trainer or somebody like yourself, it's just to know what's going on, to pay attention to it, and to seek out help or the answers, when it comes to starting an exercise program, whatever that looks like. And I think, just looking, it is all about getting back to the basics too. I know, and I know you do this with your, with the clients you work with. But when I start working with people, I'm doing the same thing you are. I'm looking at it, we're just gathering all the data. I'm gathering what they're doing now, what they, obviously what their goals are, because they come in with goals, but we got to start with where they are, what's working, what's not working, find ways to kind of crowd out the things with better things. And it's the basics. It's obviously finding, movement that we like, staying hydrated. Sleep is one of the biggest things. And I think it shocks people, because I work with women with type 1 diabetes, and especially in the hormonal stages, they don't really put all these keys together. They don't understand that it's all so related to really how we're going to function and how our blood sugar is going to respond. Because it's hard. It's a lot of work every day calculating bolus and basal rates, which is what we're doing with insulin. So when we can get the foundation strong and steady, and movement is a big part of that, it's definitely going to make life with diabetes a whole lot easier. Not easy, but easier.
One of my instructors said that the mystery is always in the history. So he taught us to dig deep and ask a lot of questions. And the other thing about your listeners, they know where their imbalances are. They know they have a little something in that right hip.
We do. We sure do.
Shoulders a little bit lower. So when they get dressed in the morning, like, God, one of my shoulders is lower than the other.
Yeah.
They already are aware of it. They're just waiting for the opportunity. This information today might be the opportunity for them to go, you know what, I want to get this addressed. Why is it tighter on my left hip when I do a yoga pose? One of the questions I had asked one of my yoga clients was, which foot do you have an easier position to do tree on? The tree pose?
Yes.
It's always my left foot. And I said, but you said you were right-handed. She said, yeah. I said, well, that's backwards. It should be your right foot. But the point is, our clients are the people, they know if we just point it out to them, just, hey, Get on the floor and do a pigeon stretch for your hip, and then let me know which one's tighter.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just
Yep.
spend a
The
little
body
bit of
doesn't
time on
lie.
that side.
Yeah, I love that. Right. Now, the final question that you had that we can ask ourselves is, do you have digestive related challenges? For instance, acid reflux, IBS. IBS is something I'm hearing more and more about lately. And I know that, here on the show, we're not going to dive too much into that. That's definitely a medical term that maybe I'll have an endo or a gastrointestinal doctor on here to talk about it. But it's another symptom of other stuff being out of balance. And of course, the blood sugar is affected by that too. So again, it's that all, it's one big ball, isn't it? It's
Well,
one
look
big
where
snowball that rubs up against each other. Yeah.
pancreas sits right behind the stomach.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I should have listed on there was autoimmune.
Oh,
That
yeah.
is I have witnessed the growth of that since 2000.
Yes, absolutely.
So what our clients tell us, oh, I have a little acid reflux, or maybe they already know they have autoimmune. This is very good to know, because that's all work in. And you know what to do dietarily for their acid reflux. So what do they need in their eating plan to help curve that? What would be something you could recommend for somebody? Acid reflux, right? They're not digesting, they're not producing enough acid, which is primarily the intestines are more acid. The mouth is more alkaline. The mouth is where you start to digest your starches and your fats, but your protein, if you don't have enough acid, and then you'll have a little problem with the little valve in your duodenum, that's what pushes that stuff back up the pipe. And unfortunately, you're usually given antacids, and I've had hundreds of clients have no long-term results. But when we increase the hydrochloric acid production, it stopped. But why am I mentioning the gut? Because the gut's right in the center. It's in the core. You have gut issues. Guess what? You and I talked a little bit about the core. Here's something for your listeners. Now, your listeners know where the core is. All they have to do is look in the mirror at their belly button and their rib cage, and they're looking at the core. Imagine, ladies, pulling that layer of skin back, and underneath there, you have a little belt, which is your main stabilizer for your spine, which helps to stabilize your knees, your hips, your shoulders, and your neck. And that gets turned off when you have excessive acid reflux, IBS, autoimmune, and if you've had any C-sections and they lacerated through the abdominal wall. Although it does heal, the reflex and the neurological part has to be rebooted. So if they go out there and if they're doing anything that's high intense where it requires stability of the spine, and the spine isn't responding for protection, then what they end up doing is beating up their spine and their hip. I saw hundreds of cases of this. So I always bring it up into every topic, whether I'm talking about injury, diabetes, or any topic. I always try to cover the core and digestion, because that is so misunderstood by the general population. In fact, I didn't see a connection with it until 2003, until I went back to school, into graduate school. My instructor in our program, he pointed it out, and my neurologist was right on track with it. And we have a way of testing it, ladies and gentlemen. I can test your inner core and tell you whether or not it's on or off. And it doesn't matter if it's off, because some of my clients will go, well, I didn't turn it off.
We get defensive, right? Yeah. What did I do wrong? Right.
Yeah. What did I do wrong? I said, you didn't do anything wrong, because when you're unaware, it's not a wrong. It's just an unknowing.
It just
but I can reboot it.
Yeah.
I can reboot it. I've had women come in after two children, C-section, and they had, let's just say it was a botched C-section. You've heard of women have had some really bad striations in their abdominal wall.
Yeah.
And we got that inner core to go back on.
Oh, that's amazing.
And this is after they tried everything else, bar, Pilates, and whatever. And they came into the clinic with repetitive hip and knee problems. And the doc says, Brian, test their inner core. and it was turned off. And they said, I've been doing core exercise. I said, you've been doing the outer core, not the inner.
Not the inner
And
core.
one more thing for your listeners.
Yeah, please share.
Do you know that your diaphragm is a core stabilizer? Interesting. So what does your diaphragm do? Well, it helps you intake oxygen. But it also indirectly helps to alkalize the blood, helps to increase oxygenation. It will help to filter and get out CO2, but it's also a core stabilizer. So I started testing the diaphragm of my patients. 99% of them, their diaphragms were not working adequately, and their blood oxygen levels were 92, 93, 90, or even 87.
Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah.
So that breathing you do in yoga, the belly
there you
breath,
go. It all goes back to the basics. Yeah.
right? You go back, and I like the way you said that, because it all comes back to the basic fundamentals. We need to get back to basic fundamental movement, restoration, and then get to all the fancy stuff.
There you go. I like that.
We skipped the whole 90s. We jumped right into boot camp. We jumped right into HIIT training. And the industry, the fitness industry, slowly started to put the brakes on and said, we need to check posture. We need to check movement. So NASM was one of the first, the National Academy of Sports Medicine. Your ladies are listening and they're going, well, I don't want to go through an assessment. You can pretty much self-assess. Put your hand on your chest, put your hand on your belly, take a deep breath in. And if you notice your top hand moving first, that's an inverted breathing pattern.
Oh, that's a cool trick. Okay. Very nice.
And if they try it sitting and it doesn't work, because it usually doesn't, I did it for 350 in an audience of medical professionals, and I could only see the first 2 rows from the stage. And I could see that they were inverted. And I had them raise their hands, how many people felt their upper hand first. And within a couple of minutes, I had them breathing down into their belly.
Very nice. Okay.
2/3 into your belly, 1/3 into your chest.
Yes.
You can even measure your client's breathing rate. It's supposed to be anywhere between 5 and 8 breaths a minute. I'll test somebody. They're at 17, man. They're working way too hard when they're resting.
Yeah.
And that affects blood sugar.
Yes.
So one of the big takeaways today is working in, breathing, and doing exercises that meet your readiness. How is your sleep? How is your stress? Because they're already working on the dietary part, thanks to what you're doing and everybody in the diabetic community is doing. If they're already working on that, we don't have to mess with that. Now we're going to give them things that, that aren't being addressed. Lowering emotional stress.
Absolutely. It's going to support everything. Yeah.
Right.
Very good. Thank you so much, Brian. And I think I was going to ask you after we just posed those 4 questions that you had, what specific action steps would you recommend that the listeners take? You just kind of sum that up, which is really just paying attention and considering the move, the working in and the working out. And if
there's a couple of things your listeners want to walk away with. Okay, number 1 is self-awareness. What time are you going to bed? So start moving that up before 10:30 if you can. Note if you're having trouble falling asleep, and note if you get up and you can't fall back to sleep. Don't feel guilty. Don't get mad if it happens, but just note that if those 2 things are in your way, that the next day you may want to take a nice barefoot walk in the grass as opposed to doing something aggressive. Take a look at yourself in the mirror. Is one shoulder higher than the other? If you're currently exercising, notice if one side of the body's tighter than the other, right? And if you have pre-existing, movement restrictions or other issues dealing with your body, get assessed. I'm the eternal optimist. I've always said, when people have asked me, who do you work with? I said, send me your most challenging client. I have to be very optimistic, because the one thing anybody's looking for, even if I can't help them, I'll always find somebody that can, though, is I want to give them hope.
I love
Keep
that.
doing what you're doing, ladies.
Yes.
Follow the instructions with your eating habits, but take another look at your sleep. your emotional stress, and use these exercises like medicine. And even if you are able to work out, use it accordingly. You can't do it too many days in a row. When to undulate down and when to undulate up.
I love that. Yes. You are a gem, Brian. We appreciate all this information, and share with our listeners how they can find you, where they can find you, how they can get in touch with maybe to learn more information or to get an assessment. I think I might be calling you for my own assessment.
We'll talk afterwards. I have an offer too. For
definitely.
Anybody, they can go to my website, wellnessmovementservices.com. You can definitely, if you just want to get it I don't want to go to this website, go to my Facebook page. As funny as that sounds, you will find a plethora of information that'll do you good. Even if you don't work with me, read the articles. There's videos on there.
Something to get you going.
You can go to my YouTube channel, and I have a lot of presentations on different topics. And if you're interested, if you live in the geographical area, because I have to be in person for an assessment, I will offer a 10% discount for anybody that calls, that knows Melissa, listens to Melissa, works with Melissa. And if you live outside my geographical area, don't worry. I'll try to find somebody in your area. I can still consult with you a little bit, and I can maybe steer you to somebody who can do the assessment for you and get you on the right track.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much, Brian. Very generous of you. And so don't be shy, ladies. You matter. The next steps that you will take after hearing all this really do matter. So thank you.
One more thing.
Absolutely. Yes.
One thing I've learned in the last 25 years is the power of the feminine. Our women are our nurturers. They are our givers. They have twice the stress tolerance than men. They have more pain tolerance than men. And they are the givers of this earth. And I've grown to really, my mother would be really proud of this, but I've grown to really have a high regard of respect for the females, because their work is really cut out for them, especially if they're bearing children.
Yes. And managing a chronic disease. Yeah, I understood. There's so many things. We all have struggles and things that we have to overcome. And information like this is powerful. I really do appreciate your time and explaining how the different systems in our body, not just insulin, responds, and why movement is a key part. And another medicine. Movement is medicine, ladies. Trust us on that. So to manage our diabetes. So again, thank you so much for sharing this very valuable information with everybody here. And maybe we'll invite you back another time. There's a lot of things to talk about. So this is kind of the tip of the...
We'll see what your listeners say. Maybe they want more questions when we're done.
That's a great idea. Yes, reach out and let us know. And all of the links that we mentioned here will be in the show notes, so you can find Brian there. And again, thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of your day, ladies, and have a hope-filled, beautiful day. Until next time.
Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Type 1 and Midlife podcast. Head over to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It's very much appreciated. Thank you. And be sure to check us out at abundanthealthwithmelissa.com for our free resources. See you next week.